Storytelling Therapy, session numero uno. This is the story of Diganawida, whose name is sacred, and the establishment of the Gayana Shagoa, the law of great peace. This is a traditional story from Haudenosaunee tradition, the Iroquois Confederation, or Iroquois Confederation. This translation is provided from Arthur C. Parker and the New York State Museum. North of the beautiful Lake Ontario, in the land of the Crooked Tongues, was a long winding bay, and at a certain spot was the Huron town Kahanayene. Nearby was the great hill Tironat Haradona. Tironot Haradandona. In the village lived a benevolent woman who had a virgin daughter. Now strangely this virgin conceived, and her Moor knew that she was about to bear a child. The daughter about this time went into a long sleep and dreamed that her child should be a son, whom she should name Diganawida. The messenger in the dream told her that he should become a great man, and that he should go amongst the Flint people to live, and that he should also go to the Many Hill Nation, and there raise up the great tree of peace. It was true, as had been said. The virgin gave birth to a boy, and the grandmother greatly disliked him, and she rebuked her daughter. "You refuse to tell me the far of the child," she said, "and now how do you know that great calamity will not befall us and our nation? You must drown the child." So then the Moor took the child to the bay, and chopped a hole in the ice where she customarily drew water, and thrust him in. But when night came, the child was found at his Moor's bosom. So then the Moor took the child again, and threw him into the bay, but at night the child returned. Then the third time the grandmother herself took the child, and drowned him, but in the next day, the child nestled as before on its Moor's own bosom. So the grandmother marveled that the child, her grandson, could not be drowned. Then she said to her daughter, "Moor, now nurse your child, for he may become an important man. He cannot be drowned, we know, and you have borne him without having marriage with any man. Now I have never heard of such an occurrence, nor has the world known of it before." Beginning with that time, the Moor took great care of her child and nursed him. She named him Diganawida in accordance with the instruction of her dream. The child grew rapidly and was remarkably strong and healthy. His appearance was noticed for its benevolent aspect, and his face was most handsome. When Diganawida had grown to manhood, he was greatly abused by the Huron people because of his handsome face and his benevolent mind. He was always honest and always told people what he believed was right. Nevertheless, he was a peculiar man, and his people did not understand him. Many things conspired to drive him away, for the Crooked Tongues had no love for such a man. Their hearts were bitter against a man who loved not war better than all things. After a journey by canoe across the lake, he came into the hunting territory of the Flint Nation. He journeyed on to the lower fall of the river of the Flint Nation, and made a camp a short way from the fall on the flat land above it. He sat beneath a tall tree and smoked his pipe in quiet meditation. A man of the Flints passed by, and seeing the fire and the stranger, approached him cautiously to discover what weapon he bore, if any. Carefully the man of the Flint reconnoitered, but saw no weapon, but only the stranger quietly smoking. Returning to the town a short distance away, the presence of the odd stranger was reported. Then the chiefs and their men went out and assembled about the man who smoked. One of the headmen was delegated to question the stranger, and so he asked, "From whence came you?" "I am Kakanayane," the stranger replied. "I am of the Wyandots, whom you call the Crooked Tongues, because our speech is slightly different," answered the stranger. "My Moor is a virgin woman." "Then," said the speaker, "by what name are you known?" "I am Diganawida, so named because my virgin Moor dreamed that it should be so, and no one else shall ever be named by this name." "What brought you here to us?" asked the speaker. So then Diganawida answered, "The great Creator from whom we are all descended sent me to establish the great peace amongst you. No longer shall you kill one another, and nations shall cease warring upon each other. Such things are entirely evil, and the great Creator, your Maker, forbids it. Peace and comfort are better than war and misery for a nation's well-being." Then answered the speaker of the flints, "All that you say is surely true, and we are not able to contradict it. We must have proof, however, before we submit ourselves to you, whereby we may know that you indeed possess rightful power to establish the great peace." So answered Diganawida, "I am able to demonstrate my power, for I am the messenger of the Creator, and the Creator truly has given me my choice of the manner of my death." "Choose then," said the speaker, "a manner of destruction, for we are ready to destroy you." Diganawida replied, "By the side of the falls, at the edge of a precipice, stands a tall tree. I will climb the tree and seat myself in the topmost branches. Then you shall cut down the tree, and I shall fall into the depths below. Will that not destroy me?" Then said the speaker, "Let us proceed at once." Diganawida ascended the tree, and it was chopped down. A multitude of people saw him fall into the chasm and plunge into the water. So they were satisfied that he was surely drowned. Night came, but Diganawida did not appear, and thus the people were sure of his death, and then they were satisfied. The next matin, the warriors saw strange smoke arising from the smoke hole of an empty cabin. They approached cautiously, and peering in the side of the wall where the bark was loosened, they saw Diganawida. He was alive and was not a ghost, and he was cooking his matin meal. So the watchers reported their discovery, and then were the chiefs and people truly convinced that indeed Diganawida might establish the great peace. The Ongwe Owe had fought long and bravely. So long had they fought that they became lustful for war, and many times Indaka Gakwa, the Soleil, came out of the east to find them fighting. It was thus because the Ongwe Owe were so successful that they said that the Soleil loved war and gave them power. All the Ongwe Owe fought other nations, sometimes together, sometimes singly, and oftentimes they fought amongst themselves. The nation of the Flint had little sympathy for the nation of the Great Hill, and sometimes they raided one another's settlements. Thus did brothers and Ogweowe fight. The nation of the Sunken Pole fought the nation of the Flint and hated them, and the nation of the Sunken Pole was Ongwe. Because of bitter jealousy and love of bloodshed, sometimes towns would send their young men against the young men of another town to practice them in fighting. Even in his own town, a warrior's own neighbor might be his enemy, and it was not safe to roam about at night, when Soikagakwa, our grandmother moon, was hidden. Everywhere there was peril, and everywhere grieving. Men were ragged with sacrifice, and the women scarred with the flints. So everywhere there was misery. Feuds with outer nations, feuds with brother nations, feuds of sister towns, and feuds of families and of clans made every warrior a stealthy man who liked to kill. Then in those days there was no great law. Our founder had not yet come to create peace and give united strength to the true men, the Ogweowe. In those same days the Onondagas had no peace. A man's life was valued as nothing. For any slight offense, a man or woman was killed by his enemy, and in this manner feuds started between families and clans. At night none dared leave their doorways, lest they be struck down by an enemy's war club. Such was the condition when there was no great law. South of the Onondaga town lived an evil-minded man. His lodge was in a swale, and his nest was made of bulrushes. His body was distorted by 7 crooks, and his long tangled locks were adorned by writhing living serpents. Further, this monster was a devourer of raw meat, even of human flesh. He was also a master of wizardry, and by his magic he destroyed men, but he could not be destroyed. Adodoro was the name of the evil man. Notwithstanding the evil character of Adodoro, the people of Onondaga, the nation of many hills, obeyed his commands, and though it cost many lives, they satisfied his insane whims. So much did they fear him for his sorcery. The time came, however, when the Onondaga people could endure him no longer. A council was called to devise a way to pacify him and to entreat him to cease his evil ways. Hiawatha called the council, for he had many times sought to clear the mind of Adodoro and straighten his crooked body. So then the council was held in the house of Hiawatha. It was decided that half the people should go by boat across the stream where it widens, and that others should skirt the shore. Autodoro was not in his nest in the swale, but in a new spot across the wide place in the stream. The boat started, and the people walked. From the bushes that overhung the shore, a loud voice sounded. "Stand quickly and look behind you, for a storm will overwhelm you." In dismay, the people arose in their canoes and turned about. And they did so. As they did so, the canoes overturned, and the men were plunged into the water, and many were drowned. A few escaped, and then all survivors returned to the village. So had Autodoro frustrated the attempt to meet with him. Again the people prepared to conciliate Autodoro. 3 times they agreed to attempt the undertaking. So on the second occasion they go by canoe and by land. Those who go by canoe follow the shore, and those who go by land walk on the pebbles close to the water's edge. Again the cunning Autodoro seized them, and calling down Hagaux, he shook him. And the people in a wild rush scramble for the feathers, for the plumes of Hagaux are most beautiful, and men are proud when their heads are adorned with them. There is a tumult, and blows are struck. Evil feelings arise, and in anger the people return to the village, still contending. The mission of conciliation is forgotten. The next day, Hiawatha called the people to their promise, and for the 3rd time to attempt a council with Autodoro. Further, they promised to obey every instruction and listen neither to a voice outside, nor an omen, nor any commotion. Another council was held in the lodge of a certain great dreamer. He said, "I have dreamed that another shall prevail. He shall come from the north and pass to the east. Hiawatha shall meet him there in the Mohawk country, and the 2 together shall prevail. Hiawatha must not remain with us, but must go from us to the Flint Land people." So when the journey across the lake was attempted, there was a division, and the dreamer's counsel prevailed. Then the dreamer held 2 councils, and those who believed in him conspired to employ Osino, a famous shaman. Hiawatha had 7 daughters whom he loved, and in whom he took great pride. Whilst they lived, the conspirators knew that he would not depart. With the daughters dead, they knew the crushing sorrow would sever every tie that bound him to Onondaga. Then would he be free to leave, and in thinking of the well-being of the people, forget his own sorrow. Hiawatha could not call the people together, for they refused to further to listen to his voice. The dreamer's counsel had prevailed. At night, Osino climbed a tree overlooking his lodge and sat on a large limb. Filling his mouth with clay, he imitated the sound of a screech owl. Calling the name of the youngest daughter, he sang, "Unless you marry Osino, you will surely die. Woo-hoo!" Then he came down and went to his own home. In 3 days the maiden strangely died. Hiawatha was disconsolate, and sat sitting with his head bowed in his hands. He grieved, but none came to comfort him. In like manner 5 other daughters passed away, and the grief of Hiawatha was extreme. Clansmen of the daughters then went to the lodge of Hiawatha to watch, for they knew nothing of Osino's sorcery. They gathered close against the large trees and in the shadows of bushes. The clansmen suspected some evil treachery, and were there to discover it. There was no moon in the sky when Osino came. Cautiously he came from habit, but he was not afraid. He drove his staff in the ground. He breathed loud like a magic totem, animals snorting, and then he climbed the tree. He spat the clay about the tree to imitate the screech owl, and as he did, he said, "Sitweet, sitweet, sitweet." Then he said, "Unless you marry Osino, you shall surely die. Woo-hoo!" The matin came, and Osino descended. As he touched the ground, a clansman shot an arrow and transfixed him. Prostrate fell Osino, and the clansmen rushed at him with a club. Osino looked up. "You are unable to club me," he said. "Your arm has no power at all. It weakens. Today I shall recover from this wound. It is of no purpose to injure me." It was true indeed. The clansmen could not lift the club to kill Osino. Then Osino arose and went home, and in 3 days the daughter died. So perished all by the evil magic arts of Osino. The grief of Hiawatha was terrible. He threw himself about as if tortured and yielding to the pain. No one came near him, so awful was his sorrow. Nothing would console him, and his mind was shadowed with the thoughts of his heavy sorrow. "I shall cast myself away. I shall bury myself in the forest. I shall become a woodland wanderer," he said. Thus he expressed his desire to depart. Then it was known that he would go to another nation. Hiawatha split the heavens, Watanwa Kaksia, when he departed, and his skies were rent asunder. Towards the south he went, and at night he camped at the mountain. This was the first day of his journey. On the second day he descended and camped at the base of the hill. On the third day he journeyed onwards, and when evening came, he camped in a hickory grove. This he named Onia no Resge, and it was on the matin he came to a place where round-jointed rushes grew. He paused as he saw them, and made 3 strings of them. And when he had built a fire, he said, "This would I do if I found anyone burdened with grief, even as I am. I would console them, for they would be covered with night and wrapped in darkness. This would I lift with words of condolence, and these strands of beads would become words with which I would address them." So at this place he stayed that night, and he called the spot Ohondogonwa, meaning rushland. When daylight came, he wandered on again, and altering the course of his journey, turned to the east. At night he came to a group of small lakes, and upon one he saw a flock of ducks. So many were there, and so closely together did they swim that they seemed like a raft. "If I am to be truly Royane, noble," he said aloud to himself, "I shall here discover my power." So then he spoke aloud and said, "O you who are floats, lift up the water, and permit me to pass over the bottom of the lake dry shod." In a compact body the ducks flew upwards suddenly and swiftly, lifting the water with them. Thus did he walk down the shore and upon the bottom of the lake. There he noticed lying in layers the empty shells of the water snail, some shells white and others purple. Stooping down, he filled a pouch of deerskin with them, and then passed on to the other shore. Then did the ducks descend and replace the water. It was here that Hiawatha desired for the first time to eat. He then killed 3 ducks and roasted them. This was the evening of the 5th day. In the matin he ate the cold meat of the roasted ducks and resumed his journey. This was the 6th day, and on that day he hunted for small game and slept. On the matin of the 7th day he ate again and turned his way to the south. Late in the evening he came to a clearing and found a bark field hut. There he found a shelter, and there he erected 2 poles, placed another across the tops, and suspended 3 shell strings. Looking at them, he said, "Men boast what they would do in extremity, but they do not do what they say. If I should see anyone in deep grief, I would remove these shell strings from the pole and console them. The strings would become words and lift away the darkness with which they are covered. Further, what I say I would surely do." This he repeated. A little girl discovered smoke arising from the field lodge, and she crept up and hastened. She advanced and peered in a chink in the bark. Then she ran homewards and told her far of the strange man. "The stranger must be Hiawatha," said the far. "I have heard that he has departed from Onondaga. Return my daughter and invite him to our house." The girl child obeyed, and Hiawatha went to her house. "We are about to hold a council," the far said. "Sit in that place on one side of the fire, and I will acquaint you with our decisions." The council was convened, and there was a great discussion. Before darkness every evening the council dissolved, and at no time was Hiawatha called upon for advice, nor was anything officially reported to him. On the 10th day of his journey, during the debate in the council, Hiawatha quietly left and resumed his wandering. Nothing had been asked of him, and he felt himself not needed by the people. Late in the evening he came to the edge of another settlement, and as was his custom, he kindled a fire and erected a horizontal pole on 2 upright poles. On this he placed 3 strings of the wampum shells. Then he sat down and repeated his saying, "Men boast what they would do in extremity, but they do not do what they promise. If I should see anyone in deep grief, I would remove these shells from this pole and console him. The shells would become words and lift away the darkness with which they are covered. Further, I truly would do as I say." This he repeated. The chief man of the village saw the smoke at the edge of the forest and sent a messenger to discover who the stranger might be. Now when the messenger reached the spot, he saw a man seated before a fire and a horizontal pole, from which 3 strings of small shells were suspended. He also heard the words spoken as the stranger looked at the strings. So then when he had seen all, he returned and reported what he had seen and heard. Then said the chief man, "The person whom you describe must truly be Hiawatha, whom we have heard left his home at Onondaga. He it is who shall meet the great man foretold by the dreamer. We have heard that this man should work with the man who talks of the establishment of peace." So then the chiefs sent a messenger who should say, O principal chief, sent me to greet you. Now then I wished you would come into our village with me." Hiawatha heard the messenger, and gathered up his supplies and went into the village. And when he had entered the chief's house, the chief said, "Seat yourself on the opposite side of the fire so that you may have an understanding of all that we do here in this place." Then Hiawatha sat there for 7 days, and the chiefs and people talked without arriving at any decision. No word was asked Hiawatha, and he was not consulted. No report was made officially to him, so he did not hear what they talked about. On the 18th night, a runner came from the south and was from the nation residing on the seashore. He told the chiefs of the eminent man who had now come to the town on the Mohawk River at the lower falls. Then the messenger said, "We have heard of the dream of Onondaga, which told of the great man who came from the north. Now another great man who shall now go forwards in haste to meet him shall change his course and go eastwards to meet in the flinty village Kanyakahake, that great man. There shall the two counsel together and establish the great peace." So said the messenger from the saltwater seashore, who came to tell Hiawatha to journey east. So the chiefs of the town where Hiawatha was staying chose 5 men as an escort for Hiawatha. They must go with him until he reaches the house where Daganoweda was present. So then on the next day the chief himself went with the party and watched carefully the health of Hiawatha. The journey lasted 5 days. And on the 5th day the party stopped on the outskirts of the town where Daganoweda was staying, and then they built a fire. This was the custom, to make a smoke so that the town might know that the visitors were approaching and send word that they might enter without danger to their lives. The smoke was the signal of friends approaching. The Mohawks, people of the Flinty country, knew the meaning of the signal, so they sent messengers and invited the party into the village. When Hiawatha had entered the house where the people had gathered, the chief asked him whom he would like to see most. Then Hiawatha answered, "I came to see a very great man, who lately came from the north." The chief said, "I have with you 2 men who shall escort you to the house where Daganoweda is present." Then the people went out, and the 2 men escorted Hiawatha to Daganoweda. This was on the 23rd day. Then Daganoweda arose when Hiawatha had entered, and he said, "My younger brother, I perceive that you have suffered from some deep grief. You are chief amongst your people, and yet you are wandering about." Hiawatha answered, "That person skilled in sorcery, Osino, has destroyed my family of 7 daughters. It was truly a great calamity, and I am now very miserable. My sorrow and my rage have been bitter. I can only rove about, since now I have cast myself away from my people. I am only a wanderer. I split the heavens when I went away from my house and my nation." Daganoweda replied, "Dwell here with me. I will represent your sorrow to the people here dwelling." So Hiawatha had found someone who considered his distress, and he did stay. Then Daganoweda told of his suffering, and the people listened. The 5 escorts were then dismissed, and Hiawatha gave thanks to them and told them to return to their own region again. Then the escort said, "Now today it has happened as was foretold in a dream. The 2 are now together. Let them now arrange the great peace." Then they returned home. When Daganoweda laid the trouble before the council, he promised to let Hiawatha know their decision. The chiefs deliberated over the sad events and then decided to do as Daganoweda should say. He then should remedy the trouble. Then Daganoweda went in perplexity to his lodge, and as he came to it, he heard Hiawatha say, "It is useless, for the people only boast what they will do, saying, I would do this way. But they do nothing at all. If what has befallen me should happen to them, I would take down the 3 shell strings from the upright pole, and I would address them, and I would console them, because they would be covered by a heavy darkness." Daganoweda stood outside the door and heard all these words. So then Daganoweda went forward into the house, and he went up to the pole. Then he said, "My younger brother, it has now become very plain to my eyes that your sorrow must be removed. Your griefs and your rage must have been very great. I shall now undertake to remove your sorrow so that your mind may be rested. Have you no further shell strings on your pole?" Hiawatha replied, "I have no further strings, but I have many shells in a tanned deer's skin." So he opened his bundle, and a great quantity of shells fell out. So then Daganoweda said, "My younger brother, I shall string 8 further strands, because there must be 8 parts to my address to you. So then Iwata permitted the stringing of the shells, and Diganuida made the strings, so that in all there were 13 strings, and bound them in 4 bunches. These must be utilized to console the one who has lost by death a near relative. My younger brother, the 13 strings are now ready on this horizontal pole. I shall utilize them. I shall address you. This is all that is necessary in your case. So then he took 1 bunch of the pole and held it in his hand whilst he talked. Whilst he talked, one after another, he took them down, and gave one to Iwata after each part of his address. The words that he spoke when he addressed Iwata were 8 of the 13 condolences. When the 8 ceremonial addresses had been made by Diganuida, the mind of Iwata was made clear. He was then satisfied and once further saw things rightly. Diganuida then said, My younger brother, these 13 strings of shell are now complete. In the future they shall be utilized in this way. They shall be held in the hand to remind the speaker of each part of his address. And as each part is finished, a string shall be given to the bereaved chief Royane on the other side of the fire. Then shall the Royane hand them back one by one as he addresses a reply. It then can be said, I have now become even with you. Diganuida then said, My junior brother, your mind being cleared and you being competent to judge, we now shall make our laws. And when all are made, we shall call the organization we have formed the Great Peace. It shall be the power to abolish war and robbery between brothers and bring peace and quietness. As emblems are Royane titles, we shall wear deer antlers and place them on the heads of Royane men. Iwata then said, What you have said is benevolent, I do agree. Diganuida said, My younger brother, since you have agreed, I now propose that we compose our peace song. We shall utilize it on our journey to pacify Otodoro. When he hears it in his mind, his mind shall be made straight. His mind shall then be like that of other men. This will be true. If the singer remembers and makes no error in his singing from the beginning to the end as he walks before Otodoro. Iwata said, I do agree. I truly believe that the truth of what you say. Then Diganuida said, My younger brother, we shall now propose to the Mohawk Council the plan we have made. We shall tell our plan for a confederation and the building of a house of peace. It will be necessary for us to know its opinion and have its consent to proceed. The plan was talked about in the council, and Diganuida spoke of establishing a union of all the nations. He told them that all the chiefs must be virtuous men and be very patient. They should wear deer horns as emblems of their position because, as he told them, their strength came from the meat of the deer. Then Iwata confirmed all that Diganuida had said. Then the speaker of the Mohawk Council said, You two, Diganuida and Iwata, shall send messengers to the Oneida people of the stone, and they shall ask the Odatshede if he will consider the plan. When Odatshede had been asked, he replied, I will consider this plan and answer you mañana. When the mañana of the next year had come, there came the answer of the Oneida Council, We will join the Confederation. So then the Mohawks, Kanyega, sent 2 messengers to Onondaga, asking that the nation consider the proposals of Diganuida. It was a midsummer day when the message went forth, and the Onondaga Council answered, Return mañana at high soleil. So the 2 great men returned home and waited until the next midsummer. Then the midday came, and the Onondaga Council sent messengers who said, We have decided that it would be a benevolent plan to build the fire and set about it with you. Diganuida and Iwata heard this answer. So then, at the same time, Diganuida and Iwata sent messengers to the Cayuga nation, and the answer was sent back. The Cayuga said they would send word of their decision mañana, upon the midsummer day. The next year, at midsummer, the Cayuga sent their answer, and they said, We do agree with Diganuida and Iwata. Now the people of the Great Hill were divided and were not agreed, because there had been trouble between their war chiefs, but messengers were sent to them. But the Senecas could not agree to listen, and requested the messengers to return the next year. So when the messengers returned, the councils did listen and considered the proposals. After a year had passed, they sent messengers to say that they had agreed to enter into the Confederacy. Then Diganuida said, I now will report to the Mohawk Council the result of my work of 5 years. Iwata then said, I do agree to the report. Diganawida requested some of the Mohawk chiefs to call a council. So messengers were sent out amongst the people, and the council was convened. Diganawida said, I, with my co-worker, have a desire to now report what we have done. On 5 successive midsummer days of 5 successive years, we have obtained the consent of 5 nations. These are the Mohawks, the Oneidas, the Onondagas, the Cayugas, and the Senecas. Our desire is to form a compact for a union of our nations. Our next step is to seek out Otodoro. It is he who has also set out not all plans for the establishment of the great peace. We must seek his fire and look for his smoke. The chief speaker of the council then said, We do agree and confirm all you have said, and we will wish to appoint 2 spies who shall volunteer to seek out the smoke of Otodoro. 2 men then eagerly volunteered, and Diganawida asked them if they were able to transform themselves into birds or animals, for such must be the ability of the messengers who approach Otodoro. The 2 men replied, We are able to transform ourselves into herons and cranes. Then you will not do, for you will pause at the first stream or swamp and look for frogs and fish. 2 men then said, We have magic that will transform us into hummingbirds. They fly very swiftly. Then you will not do, because you are always hungry and are looking for flowers. 2 other men said, We can become the dare, the white crane. Then you will not do, because you are very wild and easily frightened. You would be afraid when the clouds move. You would become hungry and fly to the ground, looking about for groundnuts. Then 2 men who were crows by magic volunteered, but they were told that the crows talked too loudly, boasted, and were full of mischief. So then in the end, 2 men who were powerful by the magic of the deer and the bear stepped before the council and were chosen. The speaker for the council then reported to Diganawida that the spies were ready to go. Then they went. Now Diganawida addressed the council, and he said, I am Diganawida, and with me is my younger brother. We two now lay before you the laws by which to frame the Kayane Rane Koa. The emblems of the chief rulers shall be the antlers of deer. The titles shall be vested in certain women, and the names shall be held in their maternal families forever. All the laws were then recited, and Hiawatha confirmed them. Diganawida then sang the song to be utilized when conferring titles. So in this way, all the work and the plans were reported to the Mohawk Council, and Hiawatha confirmed it all. Therefore, the council adopted the plan. When the spies returned, the speaker of the council said, Skandona, our ears are erected. Then the spies spoke, and they said, At great danger to ourselves, we have seen Otodoro. We have returned and tell you that the body of Otodoro has 7 crooked parts. His hair is infested with snakes, and he is a cannibal. The council heard the message and decided to go to Onondaga at midsummer. Then Diganawida taught the people the hymn of peace and the other songs. He stood before the door of the longhouse and walked before it, singing the new songs. Many came and learned them, so that many were strong by the magic of them when it was time to carry the great peace to Onondaga. When the time had come, Diganawida summoned the chiefs and people together and chose 1 man to sing the songs before Otodoro. Soon then this singer led the company through the forest, and he preceded all, singing the peace songs as he walked. Many old villages and camping places were passed as they went, and the names were lifted to them to give the clan name holders. Now the party passed through these places. The old clearing overgrown with bushes, a temporary place, protruding rocks between 2 places, parties opposite at the council fire, in the valley, drooping wing, on the hillside, man standing. I have dubbed it Lake Bridge between two side hills, lake outlet at the forks, long hill, broken branches line the spring, white corn stalks on both sides, 2 hillsides, the old beast. All these places were in the Mohawk country. Now they entered the Oneida country, and the great chief Odadshade with his chiefs met them. Then all of them marched onwards to Onondaga, the singer of the hymn of the peace hymn going on ahead. The frontier of the Onondaga country was reached, and the expedition halted to kindle a fire, as was customary. Then the chiefs of the Onondagas with their headmen welcomed them, and a great throng marched to the fireside of Ododoro, the singer of the peace leading the multitude. The lodge of Ododoro was reached, and a new singer was appointed to sing the peace hymn. So he walked before the door of the house, singing to cure the mind of Ododoro. He knew that if he had made a single error or hesitated, his power would be weakened and the crooked body of Ododoro may remain misshapen. Then he hesitated and made an error. So another singer was appointed, and he too made an error by hesitating. Then Diganoida himself sang and walked before the door of Ododoro's house. When he finished his song, he walked towards Ododoro and held out his hand and rubbed it on his body, and to know its inherent strength and dignity. Then Ododoro was made straight, and his mind became healthy. When Ododoro was made strong, his rightful powers and his body had been healed. Diganoida addressed the three nations. He said, "We have now overcome a great obstacle. It has long stood in the way of peace. The mind of Ododoro is now made right, and his crooked parts are made straight. Now indeed we may establish the great peace. Before we do firmly establish our union, each nation must appoint a certain number of its wisest and purest men, who shall be rulers Rodayane. They shall be the advisors of the people and make the new rules that may be needful. These men shall be selected and confirmed by their female relations, and whose lines the titles shall be hereditary. When these are named, they shall be crowned emblematically with deer antlers." So then the women of the Mohawks brought forward the chiefs who should become Royane, and one man, Ayamwae, as war chief. So then the women of the Onondagas brought forward 9 chiefs who should become Rodayane, and one man, Kahon Wadin who should be war chief. So then the Onondaga women brought forward 14 chiefs who should become Rodayane, and one man, Ayandes, who should be war chief. Each chief then delivered to Diganoida a string of lake shell wampum, a span in length, and as a pledge of truth. Diganoida then said, "Now today in the presence of this great multitude I disrobe you, and you are not now covered by your old names. I now give you names much greater than calling each other." To him he said, "I now place antlers on your head as an emblem of your power. Your old garments are torn off, and better robes are given you. Now you are Royane, each of you. You will receive many scratches, and the thickness of your skins shall be 7 spans. You must be patient and henceforth work in unity. Never consider your own interests, but work to benefit the people and for the generations not yet born. You have pledged yourselves to govern yourselves by the laws of the great peace. All your authority shall come from it. I do now order that Diganoida shall in one half of his being be a Royane of the great peace, and in his other half a war chief. For the Rodanaye must have an ear to and a hand to feel the coming of wars." Then did Diganoida repeat all the rules which he with Ayawata had devised for the establishment of the great peace. Then in the councils of all the 5 nations he repeated them, and the confederacy was established. Namaste. Assalamu alaikum. Shalom. Mia Zaijen. Adios. Tai Jacarisa. Sempre na asamudol. Kila Wilfred. One love and peace, happiness, liberation. This is the end of session 1.